For sure. Dude, that tick was insane. Come on. This is the run. This is the run. Come on! 30 seconds. Yes, 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 yes. Nice, that was good looking. And pretty fast, too. Yeah. Yo, guys, what is up? Max on our first Descendant video, and today we're going over my full build guide for Viessa. Now, Viessa is the only chill Descendant or chill type Descendant in the game, meaning that it's very valuable to have one of her. She is a starter character, and with some investment, you can turn her into a bit of a monster. We're going to be talking about everything that you need to know in this video. Hope you guys enjoy it. Let's get right into it. For a quick overview of Viessa, Viessa is the chill Descendant. Her skills are going to be chill tagged, chill and fusion for her first three, and then chill tech on her last one. So you kind of have to make a decision with your reactor if you want to scale the 4 or the first 3 abilities. However, you can change the tag of the 4 based off of your Transcendent modules, which we'll talk about in a second. Now, Viessa is a bit of a skill spammer. Her one ability is kind of her consistent close range, high burst damage skill that will inflict ice shackles to enemies. Ice shackles are a way to slow enemies. It's just a big slow. As you hit them with more abilities, and the different abilities deal different amounts of ice shackles, you'll be spawning your ice spheres. The ice spheres will spawn and shoot out projectiles at enemies. You can almost play her a bit as like an ice turret character, where you're constantly having these ice spheres around you damaging enemies. Her like AoE inherently isn't all that great, but the fact that you can have these like automated turrets on her all the time can be pretty powerful. And you can specifically build for these things, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Her best ability for mobility is the Frost Road. This allows you to just run around very, very quickly. I believe it's the 3rd best mobility skill in the game. And as you're running through enemies, you can inflict them with Ice Shackle. Lastly, for her 3, it's just a AoE kind of slam. Also does high damage. The one thing that we'll talk specifically about Viessa is her skill power multipliers are kind of ridiculously high. Like a 7-second cooldown on a skill that does over 1,000 damage is disgusting. And then lastly, her 4 is the big finale. This drops a blizzard in a location that ticks for 1,400 skill continuously, and then does a big explosion. Its base radius is really not that great at a radius of 4, so having range on Viessa is almost mandatory if you ever want to use this ability, and that is kind of our Viessa rundown. So we're going to start by talking about the reactor for her, because she actually needs kind of 2 different reactors. You'll also know that I'm using an Afterglow mounting. Now, this is not required at all. The farm for general rounds mountings was terrible this week, and so I kind of opted to go for the Afterglow because I'm building up an Afterglow for our Sharon build, which hopefully I'll get out soon. But just showing on screen right now is our Pyromancer kill, and you'll see that I did about 10 times the amount of damage with our skills than our sniper rifle. So note that I was just kind of using the sniper rifle for the extra skill damage. It's not like being a huge impact on our damage here. It was just the mounting that I could find for this build. Now, when looking at our reactor, the bossing reactor we're going to be looking for on her is a frozen reactor that has chill and tech, and ideally you're looking for additional skill damage when attacking a Colossus, and either skill crit hit rate or damage is kind of the god roll. Cooldown is also really good. You'll note that I didn't have a very great reactor. I could have had like way more damage to Colossus and knocked those times down a bit, but this is the reactor that I had for the video. Now, the reason we're going to be looking for chill tech is because for bossing, we're going to be using cold-bloodedness. Cold-bloodedness is my absolute favorite Transcendent module to use on bossing. We are going to be talking about both Absolute Zero and Hypothermia, though. If you are going to be using Hypothermia or you're going to be using Absolute Zero, both of them change the 4 to singular type, and so it's good to get a reactor for both different builds. Here's my reactor that I'm using for singular. It's got chill, skill power boost ratio, some skill cooldown as well. Just note that if you're going to play Viessa efficiently, you want to swap between builds, you're going to be looking for kind of both of these reactors. And once again, if you're looking to efficiently farm reactors, you can go to your difficulty level rewards, type in, for example, chill, and let's say we want tech. As you can see, the Lost Supply Depot was a terrible farm. Its classified area was dropping these like crazy, so that's why I went for the high-powered rounds mounting. Next up, for the external components, I didn't have anything too great here. I really need to farm a polar with double rolled HP, would give us a ton more survivability. But we're going to be using mix set polar, which gives us chill skill power, and also mix set annihilation, which gives us skill duration. Now, the annihilation set is really important on Viessa because her 4 ticks every 2 seconds, right? So it does a proc, a 2-second proc, a 4-second proc, and a 6-second proc. If you have 6.1 second duration on her 4, her blizzard, you will get an extra tick of damage. So just getting the tiniest little smidge of duration is incredibly valuable for DPS output with the 4, which is what we're going to be scaling for our bossing. So just note that you're really going to want to try to get a little bit of skill duration. It doesn't have to be from the annihilation set. You can use like a little bit of duration on your reactor as well, is totally fine. I opted for the annihilation set because I also have a really good sensor. Viessa is definitely a skill spammer, and finding a sensor that rolls with MP recovery in combat and max MP will just make playing her and spamming her abilities so much better. The max MP, not as important, but if you can really find a MP recovery in combat, she just feels so much better to play. So to start for her builds, we're actually going to be starting with bossing. This is my setup that I was really gearing towards with Viessa. I really wanted to use the cold-bloodedness mod. This is my favorite Transcendent mod with Viessa. We'll talk about some of the other ones later, but the big thing with this is it allows Viessa to have some of the highest cooldowns in the entire game, because when you pop your 2 with cold-bloodedness, it changes it from a movement ability to a cooldown damage increase. So this is why this is the bossing setup. You're not going to want to be using cold-bloodedness for mobbing because, you know, one of the nicest things about being Viessa is having the crazy movement speed all the time up. So cold-bloodedness, when we do click it, is going to give us a skill power increase, a mana cost decrease of our skills, and also 20% cooldown reduction. This lasts for 20 seconds. It is an incredibly powerful buff, and it's her best in slot Transcendent module for bossing, in my opinion. Now, with cold-bloodedness, we're going to be focusing on the 4. With cold-bloodedness, we can have the 4 up basically 100% of the time. Let's spawn in some ads real quick. When I was originally doing my testing, I had cooldown on my reactor, which we'll talk about in a second here. But let's spawn some ads real quick. We'll pop our cold-bloodedness before we use our 4 to get our cooldown, put down our blizzard, and you'll see our blizzard is ticking for almost 1.5 million damage. On the ads, when the explosion goes off, there's a 1.9 million damage. It is kind of crazy, and you also probably saw that the cooldown on this is just disgusting. And the cooldown of all of our skills while this is up. Look how much we can just spam our abilities while this is going. And we've got mana cooldown, we've got mana reduction. We can just cast as much as possible. It's very, very, very strong. And you're gonna, while we're like focused on the 4 for bossing, you'll note that I'm doing quite a bit of skill spamming on bosses. Your skills will be hitting really, really hard with cold-bloodedness setup. And there's a few key mods that you need for this. The first one is Dangerous Ambush. Now, Dangerous Ambush is going to be giving us a ton of skill power. Note that we're not going to be using skill power modifier on Viessa because it's a bit of a waste. The reason for this is because base power gives us a big increase on the damage before the multiplier. The modifier is just a additive to our skill power. So, for example, like let's say we were doing 4,000 skill modifier, right? We're getting 4,000 multiplier. If we added a mod, that's 80% more modifier. That's a drop in the bucket. That's nothing. It kind of works the same way with Viessa. We've got a 1,400 base continuous modifier on our skill power. Adding a little bit more to like make that like 1,500 is not as impactful as just adding as much base damage as possible. And to do that, we're going to be using Dangerous Ambush, which when an enemy is not targeting us, we're able to get a big boost. And then when an enemy is immobilized, we get a almost 50% power on our base. This is really important because of the way that Viessa's 4 works. To be honest, like my big frustration with Viessa is her 4's range is just very small. And so the key to using Viessa and getting big boss damage is making sure that you're casting it when a boss is down, because not only are we going to get the big damage from Dangerous Ambush, but we'll also guarantee all of the ticks of our 4 to hit the boss. So this is just a must-have module with her if you're going to take her on for bossing. The rest of the things for damage that we're going to be using are all focused on increasing that base power. So we've got Chill Specialist. As I was saying, you could run focus on chill here. I think it would actually be a little bit better. When I was doing my testing, had a cooldown on my reactor, and so I had 100% uptime on our 4. I think we're just slightly off of that. So focus on chill is something that you could replace with Chill Specialist. Chill Specialist does give us a little bit more damage though. Next up, we're going to be using a lot of crit. We've got Skill Concentration for more crit damage, Front Lines for more crit damage, crit rate, and Skill Insight for more crit rate. Viessa synergizes very well with crit because she's got great base crit stats. With just those, we're at 40% crit rate with a 3.3x multiplier on our crit damage. If we wanted to go for even more crit chance, we could swap Concentration out for Emergency Measures, and then all of a sudden we're at over 50% of our skills critting, which is massive. I personally went for the bigger crit multiplier with a little bit less skill crit rate, just for those bigger chunks. In terms of the rest of the mods, super important to be using as much cooldown as possible, HP, and then we're going to be using Spear and Shield for a little bit more base power and some defense. This isn't the tankiest setup because we are not super speccing into defense, but we are able to deal as much damage as possible to bosses. Next up, we get to talk about our Absolute Zero setup. Now, I like this setup a lot for mobbing. You are going to want to swap your reactor to a singular. When we put on Absolute Zero, all of our tags on all of our skills are going to be converted to singular, which is incredibly convenient for scaling them. And the big thing with Absolute Zero is we're no longer going to inflict slow on enemies. When a skill lands a critical hit, we create an ice sphere that flies around. The ice sphere that is created flies to nearby enemies, dealing damage to those hit enemies. It deals burst damage. On critical hit, we inflict frostbite. So frostbite is going to instantly freeze enemies whenever we crit, which is incredible. It's going to give us damage on our 2 rather than just being a slow. And every time we're going to be critting, we're going to be summoning ice orbs. And this setup works incredibly well for mobbing. I'm about to click my 2 here and just kind of run through this pack, and I'll show you what happens. As we're running through, we're going to be critting constantly. Those are... Sorry, my computer's doing weird things. Those are 200,000 crits from my 2 ability. And as we're freezing things, we're going to be able to summon our orbs. Everything just gets constantly frozen, and the damage is really high. We're going to want, if you're going to invest into a setup, you're going to want a lot of skill crit rate. That's using emergency measures, frontline, and skill insight so that we can get as much crit as possible. And then every time that we're critting, we're just instantly freezing things. But really, this with the 2 is just such a strong synergy because the dot damage on it is actually kind of nutty. As you can see, those are like 166,000 procs. And earlier when we had our full buffs up, we had 200,000 procs. Just off of running around passively. It's a bit like Valby. Some real important mods with this is MP Collector. We're going to be wanting spamming our skills. We're going to want as much crit as possible. And we still have a lot of base damage on our skills, so that's what we're going for with that. We're still going for lots of base. You could throw in a little bit of modifier, which I actually did, which was very smart. I did throw in a technician just so that we could boost up the damage of the 2 there and not have to change any of our polarities. So that is a little bit of a difference, as we do want to buff up this more. So because it's a low base modifier, we throw in some extra modifier for some extra damage. Real quick, for a little bit more of a budget setup, I know it's not like full budget, but just kind of like hitting all the really important core things for Viessa. For cold-bloodedness, you need cold-bloodedness, so this is going to give you your bossing damage. Chill Specialist, big base power boost, HP and defense for some survivability, MP conversion for as much cooldown as you can get on a budget setup, and then skill crit rate and skill crit damage, so that your 4 is going to be hitting as hard as possible, and a little bit of skill range so that your 4 is hitting in a big area. This would be my like kind of budget bossing setup with this. Next up, we get to talk about Hypothermia. Now, Hypothermia is very different if you want to build around it than Cold-Blooded or Absolute Zero, and that is because this whole video I've been kind of ranting about how Viessa has really high base modifiers, so you don't really need more modifier. With Hypothermia, the modifier is really low. So Ice Needle's a dot at level 4. It's doing 23% of our skill damage, which is really low on like Freyna. Her 1 is like 60% skill. Valby's like 130 running around. It is not that much dot, but it is more dot, and it changes her freeze in Hypothermia from being something that is slowing enemies to more of a damage over time. As someone who loves damage over time, I do like Hypothermia, but I honestly was a bit underwhelmed by it. The big thing with Viessa, in my opinion, is if you are investing into her abilities basically just one-shot all the enemies in the game. So having a dot didn't seem overly important to me, but you can go on the 3. Here you'll see the difference between Absolute Zero and Hypothermia. Now I'm hitting like 8,000 dots versus like over 200,000 dots. Oh, sorry, 87,000 dots. So definitely less damage, but it is some quality of life because you just have more damage uptime. On this, the big thing that we're going to want to be focusing on actually this time around is we're really going to make sure that we want skill power modifier. Skill simplification is going to give us the most amount of modifier. It does come at the cost of MP, but with the more modifier, we're able to boost up those dots a lot. My only like concern with this setup, just slightly, because I didn't super spec for it, is the fact that we kind of need MP Collector in order to spam it, and I just don't have an open slot without skill simplification. And if we do put MP Collector, then we lose a ton of damage on the Hypothermia, just to give you an idea, because now we lose modifier that was giving us a ton of base. I think we just went from like 87 or 80 to 90,000 dots. Now you'll see we're at 22,000 dots. So this would be a lot more uptime on our abilities and casting them. And MP Collector is going to allow you to spam your abilities a lot more. But if you really want to scale Hypothermia damage, you kind of need as much of a modifier as possible. And that is why I'm using skill simplification. Just in order to fit the other setups, there's not a lot of flexibility for throwing MP Collector and skill simplification, which is kind of exactly what this setup would need. So if you are a Hypothermia enjoyer, you could change one of these to a, or put 2 of these little X symbols on, and then you would have a perfect setup. You don't quite need as much cooldown, so you could change one of these cooldowns to a skill simplification, and then you could run a full Hypothermia build. Lastly, there is a Transcendent module that I was not able to acquire for this video that I really wanted to showcase. Cold Snap Watch allows you to create permanent AoE chill zones that do AoE damage, that do dot, and it changes the 3. I don't have any footage of it, but you're able to put the 3 down, and instead of it being a like insta wave, it'll lock down an area with a basically like a sphere. And I think that's a really fantastic mod for mobbing. One thing about Viessa is if a wave of mobs spawn and you cast your ability, if more mobs spawn right behind them, you need to cast your abilities again. And so that Cold Snap Watch allows Viessa to have really good AoE lockdown. It's very similar to like Freyna or Valby, where you kind of just leave dots and continuous damage on the floor. So if you are looking for a better mobbing Viessa and you're not happy with the other two Transcendent modules that I showed, that is a really, really cool one. Now let's talk about weapons. Now, the one weapon that I didn't have for this build video, once again, I am farming my butt off trying to get all these videos out for you guys. But the Clairvoyance is a very interesting weapon. I've heard pretty mediocre things about it, but it does have the ability to reduce chill resistance on enemies, which would be a direct buff for Viessa's abilities. This just as a stat stick, not something that you invest into very much, but if you could get multiple copies and constantly apply chill resistance, this would be a really great bossing option for her. I don't think you'd really need it for mobbing, but the reduced chill resistance would really help. The other awesome weapon that you could use on Viessa, need to invest more into it, is the Nazistra's Devotion. I'm actually starting to work on this right now. I gotta level mine up to 100. But the Devotion has its own unique passive that also reduces defense. If you get 4 of these, you get up to, I believe it's 30% defense down, which is another like solid, just kind of stat stick weapon that you can use with Viessa to increase the damage of your abilities. Until I get those things, I don't really have a build to show off for you guys right now. But the weapons that I was rocking on her was the Thunder Cage and the Afterglow. I'll show you guys my Afterglow mods real quick. It's not perfect yet. I still have a little bit more work to do. But the big core things you want on the Afterglow, if you do want to use a Sniper on Viessa, which, by the way, Sniper on Viessa is actually quite synergistic. The fact that you can freeze enemies and reduce their action speed by 90% makes it really easy to line up headshots with the sniper rifle. So I was actually really enjoying using the Afterglow on her. But the mods that are super important here are your base damage, rifling, and action and reaction. Weak point expansion is a disgusting amount of damage. This is on weak point hit, weak point damage plus 140%. This actively applies to the shot that triggers the weak point. So it's not like you get a shot and your next shot deals 140% weak point. The shot that hits the weak point gets the 140%. So this is just when you hit that weak point. It is on a 10-second cooldown, but when you do hit that weak point, you're getting a shot with 140%, which is just kind of disgusting damage. Weak point sight for even more weak point, better concentration priority, better insight, and focus fire are lots of just increases damages. And then I left this slot kind of open for extra damage on bosses, depending on which boss we were fighting. So for like Pyromancer, I'd throw on chill, and then you could kind of swap an element in and out here. This is my mobbing Thunder Cage. This is my mobbing Thunder Cage build. I posted a video on this quite literally yesterday, so not really too much to review here. If you want to learn more about the Thunder Cage, you can watch that video, but that's my mobbing setup, and that is my bossing setup on the Thunder Cage. Guys, that is going to do it for the build video. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know which Descendant you would like to see next. I'm kind of torn right now between doing a Sharon build and doing a Leapic build. But let me know down below in the comments what you'd like to see next. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hope you found it informative. I'll catch you all on the next one. Take care. Peace.